So, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill banning all students in Texas from using cell phones in school. Not just phones, tablets, smartwatches, probably Etch-a-Sketches next if they vibrate, because the path to academic glory apparently runs straight through a Faraday cage. Now I get it. Kids glued to screens look like zombies auditioning for a Black Mirror reboot. You walk into a middle school and it's like staring into the digital abyss. And sure, scrolling TikTok for 8 hours a day probably isn't building the next generation of critical thinkers, unless the SATs now include a section on lip sync choreography and mukbang commentary. But here's my problem. Who's making the call? Because it isn't the parents, it isn't the school boards, it's the state of Texas. Top-down, one-size-fits-all, unilaterally imposed by a guy who supposedly worships local control until it's inconvenient. See, as a libertarian, I don't want kids zombified either. I also don't want to live in a state where every perceived social problem is met with yet another government ban. Newsflash, Greg, banning things is what California does when it panics. I thought you were against that kind of thing. They say the bill is about restoring focus and reducing anxiety. Great! But why does the solution to every new problem seem to be more government power and less personal choice? Why not let parents decide whether little Johnny can text during lunch? Why not let school districts, the people who are closer to the students, figure out what works? And spare me the exceptions clause. Well, there are exceptions for emergencies and medical needs. Thanks, that's a comfort. Until you remember Uvalde, where it was the students' phones that helped get the word out while the adults were standing in the hallway checking their shoelaces. But sure, let's lock up the phones in little yonder pouches and hope nothing bad ever happens again. Now, to be fair, some schools tried this voluntarily and saw good results. More eye contact, fewer Fortnite meltdowns, and maybe even some learning. That's great when it's local, transparent, and voluntary. That's how you build real solutions, not with a legislative sledgehammer from Austin. Because let's be honest, this isn't really about kids' mental health. It's about control, about politicians pretending to parent 5.5 million students from the Capitol building. You know what else kills focus? Overregulation. You know what causes stress? Being told by a bureaucrat what you can and can't carry in your backpack because someone's polling data says screens are scary. Look, if Texas schools want to experiment with phone-free policies, I'm all for it. Let them try. Let the parents weigh in. Let the kids hate it or love it and learn something about trade-offs. But don't pretend a top-down mandatory device ban is the same thing as freedom-loving leadership. So yeah, by all means, let's help kids focus. But maybe next time we teach them why boundaries matter instead of mandating them like it's martial law with better cafeteria options. Because if liberty doesn't survive middle school, folks, we're going to have a hell of a time saving it anywhere else.